What's up, everyone? It's Ditch. Welcome to the DTE podcast. Change is a choice. Thank you guys for tuning in. As anybody knows who's been following me in my journey, it's been 4 months since I've dropped a podcast, but it's also been a week since I've been on social media, and it's been over 3 months since I've dropped any new music. So that's very unusual for me, but, I had to really slow myself down, really ground myself, center myself. I've been going through a lot of really deep personal work with myself, with my family, and been in a lot of therapy, all that kind of stuff. So before we get too deep into everything, I just want to kind of give you guys an idea of what this episode is going to be looking like, and also what the relaunch of this podcast itself is going to look like. So let's get started. I am going to be doing 2 episodes a week, Tuesdays and Thursdays. So we're going to be talking, it's going to be centered around mental health, mainly. Obviously, sharing my journey, sharing what I'm learning in current time from some of the greatest thinkers, obviously, and the people that I look up to and whatnot, and also just anecdotal experience, you know what I mean, that I've been through, and whatever I'm going through, I'm going to share with you guys, you know what I mean. And I'm also going to talk about basketball. I'm going to talk about, obviously, the music industry, my music, of course, but also just like weekly drops, what we're excited for, whatever everybody's talking about in the community, that kind of stuff. So I'm super excited to get to engage with the community more, about just like current topics, trending topics, things like that, but also to be a voice for the mental health community, and for anybody out there who really feels alone, feels like anybody doesn't, understand, and anybody who's going through really, really extreme mental illness, or like I said, or like genuine trauma, right? So this is something that I want to also say before I go into my, personal stuff, is that nowadays the word trauma is used very lightly. But today in this podcast, the word trauma is going to be used very seriously. There's going to be also topics that might be very triggering for people, such as suicidality and things of addiction and things of that nature. So if that's not your cup of tea, if that's not something that you want to really, if it's too heavy for you, now's your sign to kindly reminder, right? Respectful reminder to let you know that that's going to be what this podcast is going to be about. So, without further ado, let's get into it. So I want to start with really. First off, I'm adopted. So a lot of people don't know I am adopted, and it's. First off, I'm very grateful to be adopted, first and foremost, because a lot of kids out there, they're orphans their whole life. They never do get adopted. So I'm blessed to be adopted. But once you're adopted, there's also another set of, it's a way of life, right? To be an adopted child. And it's very different. You wonder where you got your eyes from, your nose from, your ears from, your voice from, like your physical features from, all your personality, all of these things. You wonder, you and a lot of kids never know, anything about it. And to be quite frank with you, I'm very blessed to have 2 adoptive parents who not only, provided an incredible life for me, but also 2 adoptive parents who were from the get-go, as long as I can remember, from when I was a baby, very open with me about the fact that I am adopted, right? So first and foremost, that is, being adopted is its own thing, right? So coming into the world, right? I'm already starting off with something that's very tough to deal with, right? Other than that, and related to that, I should say, in relation to being adopted, I love my birth mother, and we have an incredible relationship. She well, I should say I have an incredible relationship with her spirit. You know, she unfortunately passed away when I was 2 years old, but she was a great woman, and she was full of love and passion, and she was doing her best, right? But she had her own demons, as everybody does, and nobody's perfect. We're all human. And so when she was pregnant with me, she did use some substances. I'm not sure what kind of substances, but she did use some substances while she was pregnant with me, and as a result, I have a lot of neurological issues. I was diagnosed from a very young age with anxiety and panic disorder, depression. I had petit mal and grand mal seizures from a very young age. Luckily, I grew out of them, but that was an incredibly traumatic experience I'll go into a bit later about, that I had to go through. So already going into this world, right, was an incredibly, like, wow, right? So obviously I'm very grateful that I was adopted, and I was very blessed to have such an incredible opportunity, right, to have a life on one hand. But on the other hand, it was like I had all of these neurological issues, and I had all of these genetic issues, and I felt so out of place, and I was really starting, with the odds against me as far as how I'm wired, right? So that's just to set kind of a preface, or whatnot, before I go into, what I launch into. To give you guys an idea of kind of what I deal with, who I am, not who I am, but like the mental illnesses that I deal with, from the get-go. So, and not to mention addiction, right? So I'll go into that later, but I also inherited that gene of being an addict. So luckily, and thank God, I'm in recovery. So that's an enormous blessing, and I'm eternally grateful for that. But I did inherit that gene. So I'm just looking at my notes here real quick. I took a lot of notes to keep myself organized here. So yeah, I have a lot of birth siblings, right, on both my mom and my dad's side. I have 3 birth siblings on my mom's side that I'm mainly close to, though. My sister Heidi, my sister Lizzie, and my brother Kyle. Shout out to you guys. I love you guys so much, and I'm so grateful to be able to have a relationship with you guys. And we've all had our own really crazy independent journeys, right? And a lot of us didn't even know we existed for a while, right? And it's truly remarkable that we've all got to spend time with each other. And for the first time, it's almost been 2 years, I think. For the first time, we all 4 got together in person in the same place at our sister Lizzie's wedding. And it was just a truly, truly remarkable experience. So I love them so much, and I'm truly blessed to know them. On my dad's side, I have brothers and sisters, but I'm not as really connected to them, or very closely connected to, but I'd love to be, you know what I mean? So if any of y'all, if any of you guys are watching, please do reach out. Let's connect more. I'd love to meet you guys. Let's spend time, all that kind of stuff. It really is a blessing to be able to have the opportunity to meet your birth family when you're adopted. So now going into, in relation to all that, from a very young age, I was in therapy because I was, clearly my parents knew, they could see the symptoms of me being a drug baby. They would tell me that I would come out, and by the way, when I use the term drug baby, I don't mean that in a derogatory term, in way. It's a lack of a better term, right? So, they would tell me when they would bring me outside, I would scream because of light, and, tags would be really, really irritate me, and my ears would get red and hot for no reason, and, all kinds of weird stuff like that. So, it's another thing. I deal with acid reflux, so, so my parents knew from a very young age that, I was going to be dealing with extreme, difficulties as far as just neurologically with myself, mental illness wise, disability, mental disability essentially. And so they had me in therapy from a very young age, trying to find somebody who had answers, just to find a way to help their baby, and I'm eternally grateful to my parents for that. My adoptive parents, that is, of course. When I refer to my parents, I'm typically referring to my adoptive parents, by the way. Arthur and Jillian are their names, also, just to make it a bit more of an intimate and personable, relation. So they had me in therapy from a very, very young age, and they did their absolute best, right? Now, when I was about, I as early as I can remember, really, is about 4 or 5 years old. I think is about how old I was when this happened. I was walking to school one day with my mom, my adoptive mom, and Jillian, and I had just been, for a long time already, I had just been nagging her about, not nagging her, but like I'd just been asking her. I've been like, how is my birth mother? My birth mom's name is Rhonda. How's my birth mom, Rhonda? How is she doing? Like all these things. And I'm a very spiritual being, and as a child, I was already a very spiritual being. I could feel energy, all those kinds of things, as a lot of children can, more so than adults, and so I kept asking my mom, Jillian, like as if I knew something was what had happened to my birth mother, Rhonda. And we were walking to school one day, and my mom just, she had read in a book somewhere that, like, if your adopted child asks, they're ready to know. And so she told me, because she felt like, well, if I don't tell him now, I'm lying to him. I'm holding it back. You know what I mean? So she told me that, my birth mother, Rhonda, sadly had passed away from cervical cancer. And I don't remember anything about that day, but my adoptive mom, Jillian, says she'll never forget it, because she dropped me off. First off, she wishes she hadn't dropped me off at school, but she dropped me off at school. And then when I came home that day, I was a different child from that day forward. She said I went into my room. I huddled into the corner of my room. I wouldn't speak to anybody. I was crying hysterically. I, was out of, just didn't know what to do, and I developed this thing called reactive attachment disorder. And, getting that news at a very young age affected my psyche in a way I just didn't know how to process it. I was too young. I didn't know how to process it. And as a result, my system developed this reactive attachment disorder, where anytime someone tries to touch me, or anytime I start to connect with someone, I start to also panic and start to get this, like, don't touch me, or like I start to push away, and it's a very instinctual, reactive thing. And so, first off, I want to say I'm grateful to my mother, Jillian, for telling me, though. I know that my mom feels very guilty a lot of times, and for telling me, because she feels like that's what set me off on this path of having, like, this reactive attachment disorder and whatnot. But, listen, she was doing her best, and she was trying to be honest with me and be real, and she wanted to tell me the truth, and I can't blame her for that. I can't, she did her best. So so already, you know what I mean? You see what I'm saying? Like, I'm only 4 or 5 years old, you know what I mean? And already, I've gone into, I've came into the world with all these neurological disorders, all mental illnesses, and then my birth mother passes away. So fast forward a couple years, right? I've been in therapy for so many years, whatnot. My parents just don't know what to do. I was a very out of control child. Like, I was not easy to parent. Like, God bless my parents. I was not an easy child to deal with by any means. And I just didn't know what to do. I mean, to be honest, I didn't know, as most kids don't. Oops, sorry. My computer went to sleep there for a second. I thought the podcast stopped. Thankfully, it didn't. Um, no, but like, look, it's like, where was I? My so I was talking about being adopted. Okay, fast forward a few years. That's right. So I'd been in therapy for many years, whatnot, and it just wasn't working. So I went to after sixth grade. I transferred out of public school to a private school for children who really had more learning disabilities and who needed more special attention. Let's say, right? And I needed smaller classes. And also, I had extenuating circumstances. I was dealing with seizures. I was dealing with all these neurological issues. So there's a lot of times where I wouldn't. I mean, I would wake up and I wouldn't be able to function. I couldn't go, let alone go to school. You know what I mean? So we needed a school who could understand that and work with that and have a special program for that and all that kind of stuff. So it was this long process that we had to go through. So, anyways, I go to this new private school, right? And I actually end up only being there for a year. But while I'm there, I start going into these outpatient. This is when I start. I should say this is when I have my seizure, my grand mal seizure, around this time, and that was a very scary experience for me because I just remember one night eating dinner with my parents. I got up to clear my table, as any child would do if they listened to their parents, which it was a hit or miss with me those days. But that day I did, and that's the last thing I remember. And then, according to my parents, and my dad, thankfully, was right there because I was at the table looking like I was falling asleep. As a lot of people, if you don't know, before someone has a grand mal seizure, a lot of times they'll start they'll start nodding off. They'll start having symptoms that they're about to have a seizure. And so I started looking. My parents didn't know. They thought I was just sleepy. So my dad started, walking me upstairs by my side, by my side, and all of a sudden I just fell and I just went into this seizure, and next thing I know, I woke up in the hospital, and I couldn't remember my own name. I couldn't remember my birthday. I didn't know who I was. I didn't know where I was. My parents were in the room, and I could recognize their faces, but it was like seeing someone that it was like seeing a face you knew was familiar, but hadn't but you couldn't put a name to it. You know what I mean? And then slowly, after about 30 minutes to an hour, I regained all of my memory. My consciousness was back, all that kind of stuff. But it was a really intense experience for someone who was maybe 10 years old or something like that. And it was around that time I started being in outpatient programs in the UCLA hospital. I'd spend a couple weeks in the hospital, and then I'd come out, and then I'd spend a couple weeks in the hospital, and then I'd go out, and then I went to this program called Center for Discovery down in Whittier, California. And if anyone in California knows, Whittier is just like it's not a great place to be. But I went down to Whittier, California, and this was one of those kind of programs. It was like a couple months at a time, you know what I mean? But I was like a 12-year-old kid, so I was in there and a couple months at a time. And I'd go there, and then I'd go back home, and then I'd go there, and then I'd go back home, and so I went through all of these things, and this leads me to eventually, when I was about 13 years old, I went to my first residential treatment center. Called Logan River Academy. And LRA was as you can see, I'm kind of already having flashbacks and instinctive, reaction to the thought of it. Even as a 13-year-old child, I was in this place that I just mentioned, this outpatient, inpatient, whatever treatment place, Center for Discovery, and I was woken up in the middle of the night by two big men, and they said, "Get dressed, you're coming with us." And I didn't know what else to do, so I did what I was told. And these men, they put me on a plane. They flew me out to Utah, and flew Salt Lake City, Utah. We flew into, and then they drove me up to Layton, Utah, or no, not Layton, Utah. Sorry, Logan, Utah. Very up north in Utah, and this place was really it first off, it should be shut down, and it's still open somehow. I don't know if it's the same owners. I don't know enough about all this stuff, but it should be shut down. It portrays itself as a therapeutic boarding school to help troubled youth and those kind of things. It really is a boarding school, that's for sure, but it's an institution. I would call it an institution. I was there. I was 13 years old, and I was there for about a year. And I came in there, and I was rooming with 17-year-olds going on 18, and they were my roommates. They were there instead of juvenile hall. That was what this was their opportunity out, right? Instead of these were criminals. These were juvenile delinquents. I mean, they were robbing people. They were doing all kinds of stuff. And I was a 13-year-old kid coming into this room, this institution boarding school. And I remember I used to have, it was 2, 3, I'd have 3 to 4 roommates at a time in these bunk beds in these rooms. And I would get physically beaten. They'd circle around me and just beat the fuck out of me. They would taunt me. They would tease me. They would do stuff. They would do unspeakable stuff. They would collect their toenail clippings and stuff, put it into my bed. They would do unspeakable stuff. They would collect. They would all ejaculate onto a sock and then put it in your pillow, and it was really it was a lot to deal with as just a 13-year-old child in this. I was scared to death just not being at home, let alone all that stuff. And then there was this experience I had with a specific student that his name will not be named, but I will refer to him as Jack, who now I look back and I see that this individual was about 17 years old. Jack was. I was about 13, barely 13, and this 17-year-old person, he groomed me. He groomed me, and he developed a sexual relationship with me, and he sexually abused me, and he sexually assaulted me, and thankfully there was no intercourse that took place, but everything else did. There was oral, there was kissing, there was touching, there was all that kind of stuff. And later I found out that actually a staff member was in on it. This individual, Jack, had made a deal with this staff member who was homosexual that he would send him, they would have sexual relations, and in return this student would not get him in trouble, and he would let him abuse me and other people, I'm sure. So LRA, Logan River Academy, is a terrible place. There were good people there, though, right? Like my therapist there, David Woodbury was his name. Great human being. He was just naive and innocent. He didn't realize what was going on. The therapist there didn't realize what was going on. The teachers there, they had, the teachers who were teaching the school there, they didn't realize what was going on. And they tried the staff weren't qualified. These were college kids at Utah State University who needed a job, and they were working here watching us, but they weren't qualified. But they meant well. They didn't know what was going on, right? They didn't realize this was a business. Logan River Academy is just one of many mental health institutions that are businesses, for-profit businesses that milk people's insurance, rob children of their humane rights, and treat them with abuse a lot of times. I can't even begin to describe the level of abuse that takes place to these children who had to grow up in these places like myself. So, I spent a year or so about at this place called Logan River Academy, and like I said, if anybody here is watching this and was at Logan River Academy, I encourage you to reach out. I encourage you to say something to me. I encourage you to, if anybody knows how we can get this place to maybe be shut down, like, let's hopefully try to do that. Anything we can do to raise awareness, essentially, just also about the general business of these mental health institutions that are taking advantage of children and families, quite frankly. Innocent parents who are just looking for help for their children. It's not like my parents knew. They were just looking for help. They didn't know what to do. They were looking for help from me. And they didn't see that there was any other option because nothing was working, so they're like, well, I guess we're going to have to send our child to a boarding school. And then the boarding school was not a boarding school. It was an institution, and it was not a good place. So I got out of there after about a year, thankfully, and I come home and I start going to a specialized middle school / high school. It's called Westview. There was about a couple hundred kids in the middle school and high school combined. It was an extremely small school. It was obviously a private school, but it was complete. It was extremely individualized and very personalized for each child, right? I had a therapist there, like a counselor. The classes were very small, things like that, right? So I transitioned to this school after being in Logan River Academy, and it was just a fresh breath of air because I was free, I was finally free of all that abuse and all that crazy stuff that had happened, and I could just be back to being a kid again. I still remember I was 14 years old, and look, like, I had a great time at Westview. I spent my 8th grade year there and my 9th grade year there, and I made lifelong friends there that I'll never forget. I'll always feel very close to. Some that I still talk to this day, some that I don't talk to this day, but I will always forever be grateful for the experiences and connections I had at that school with the kids that were there, because we were all just a bunch of misfits. We were all just a bunch of misfits that were going through crazy shit. A lot of us came from LRA or places like that, these institutions, and we were just trying to figure it out. And we would connect over that stuff, and just being children, having gone through some wonky, wacky shit. But meanwhile, my problems at home continued. Not only with myself as far as my neurological disorders, but also just fighting with my parents. I was a very oppositional child. I was very angry. I dealt with it. I still deal with impulse control, right? As I'm sure any addicts watching right now know, that's the one of the main ingredients of addiction. So, I was out of control. I was out of control as a child, and it was unacceptable behavior for me to behave that way, But I didn't know any better, and I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to deal with everything that I had been going through, and just the way I was wired. So then, fast forward to, I go to, things just aren't working at home. I'm barely able to go to school at Westview. Um, Luckily, I'm a very intelligent human being, so it wasn't like my grades. Like, I could get good grades and all these things. I could make it through school and I could do the books and da da da. But I couldn't, I just couldn't keep it together. I just couldn't keep it together. I couldn't function. And, excuse me. So, my parents made the decision. Mind you, my parents didn't know, of course, that I had been abused at LRA and all this stuff had happened. I didn't tell them. I didn't know how to process it with myself, let alone tell anybody else. So, and my parents really felt like they were doing the right thing. And quite frankly, parents, that's what parents are supposed to do. Like, they're supposed to do, you're supposed to make your, keep your children in line and make decisions. Excuse me. That acid reflux again. Make decisions for your children to keep them safe before they're able to make their own decisions. So it's like, I totally understand. It was not to their own fault. And I'll never forget, well, before I go into that, so it came to the point where it just wasn't working, and my parents made the decision to send me away to another residential treatment center. And I'll never forget and again, I was woken up in the middle of the night, this time at my parents' home. I was woken up in the middle of the night, and I was pulled out of my bed. Well, not pulled out of my bed, but I was taken out of my bed in the middle of the night and told, by these two big men, like, you're going to come with us. It's going to be the easy way or the hard way. We can, handcuff you, or you can come with us willingly, and we can make this a comfortable process. So I got up and I went with them, and we drove from Los Angeles to Vegas, which is, anybody knows, it's not too far, but it's a couple hours, few hours, obviously 3-4 hours. And then we drove another hour, 2 hours or so towards Area 51-ish area, middle of nowhere. And they dropped me off to these people, to these ranchers, to these ranchers guys. They looked like ranchers, right? I didn't know who they were. And I was like, oh my God, what is happening? And they put me in this car, in this truck, and we just started driving. And mind you, we're in the middle of nowhere. It's like, think Area 51. There's just like desert everywhere, right? And I'm like, fuck. Like, what am I where are we going? So we start driving into the middle of the forest, middle of nowhere. And then, we had a trailer with horses. That's right. We had a trailer with horses. And we get out to this middle of nowhere, and they take me out of the car, and they're like, all right, you're going to walk this horse. So I was like, all right, I'm going to walk this horse. So I start walking this horse. I come to find out it's a 10-mile hike that I'm going on. I'm walking this horse. And this process that I'm going through is called introspection. It's a phase of going through withdrawal, complete. It's a state of when you're in a state of shock, obviously, but it's a place. It's a state of introspection. It's an opportunity to be introspective, And so I'm walking for this in the Nevada desert heat in the middle of the summer. I'm walking this horse, and I'm like 15 years old, and I'm like, fuck this. Like, I'm cursing out all these ranchers I'm with and all this stuff. And so finally we get to this cabin, right? And finally we get to this cabin, and I end up spending, long story short, I end up spending like 4 or 5 days at this cabin. And I go through all these things and tasks that I have to do and assignments and whatnot, and I meet my therapist, and I'm like, I was like, what the fuck is going on? This is very different. This was very different than LRA, Logan River Academy. It was like, it wasn't an institution, it wasn't a boarding school, it wasn't like that. It was, so I didn't know what was going on. It wasn't something that was familiar to me, right? It wasn't another one of those same situations, And so, anyways, then after about 4 or 5 days, they bring you into the main house. And I and also they brought you to the actual where the my computer went to sleep again. Um, they bring you after 4 or 5 days. They bring you inside to they bring you inside to the main house and also onto the main property outside of the middle of nowhere. I mean, it's still in the middle of nowhere, but compared to like being in a cabin in the middle of the woods, what called the range, right? Where, as I came to find out later. Anyways, so I end up. Long story short, I'm living at this place, and I'm living with about 20 boys, right? So instead of it being this boarding school institution with hundreds of kids, and there's teachers, and it's this huge operation, it's 20 boys. It's one home, and my therapist, who is the owner of the program. This program is called KW Legacy Ranch. KW Legacy Ranch. And I want to say first off that it's an amazing program. It is not like one of those other programs that's like I was referencing before, that's just an institution that's here to profit off of your children and your innocent families' desperate pleas for help. This is a family. KW is a family. KW is a special place, and it's a one-of-a-kind space. And I'm so blessed, and I thank the universe, and I thank God, whomever out there was watching out for me, directing me to the middle of nowhere, Nevada, to be one of these 20 kids, to be a part of this family and part of this ranch. So I just want to say that because I don't want, I just went on this whole rant about how Logan River Academy is this terrible place, this other institution, and then I'm saying I'm getting sent to this next institution. But it's a totally different experience and totally different place. So I just want to distinguish that. So anyway, I ended up spending about over 2 years at this ranch, right? And mind you, I'm from Los Angeles. I grew up in Los Angeles. I'm a city boy, and it was a shock. I'd never heard of, like, I went down to Ralph's and Vaughn's for milk, on the ranch. We'd go down there and we'd milk the cows. And so it was a crazy experience, but you know what? I wouldn't trade it for anything, because looking back now, I did 1 year of real high school at that place, Westview. The last 3 years I did online homeschooling at this ranch, and I really didn't, it wasn't really much of schooling compared to what a high school would have been, and I just learned real life lessons on the ranch, and I learned how to be a man. I learned how to work hard. I learned the concept, you reap what you sow, which is very, very, very obviously prevalent to the life of a rancher, the life of a farmer. I learned what it meant to be family. I learned how to push myself, what it was like to have people who loved me, who would push me, who would expect something from me. Oh, I mean, I can't even begin to express how much love and gratitude I have for this place. It was really a family. We would go out during Christmas. We would go cut our own Christmas tree, and we would decorate the Christmas tree, and we would go carol around the town. And the staff would come in during the holidays, and they'd spend time with us. And these are people who had their own families. And it's like, even just talking about it right now makes me emotional, because it's like these people saved my life. And these people saved my life. These people saved my life, and Luke Hatch is the name of the man who, to me, is a father figure first and foremost. But he was my therapist. He owns the program, and this program was built. Also, this ranch, I forgot to say, the land that it's on. It's Luke Hatch's father's ranch. It's where he grew up as a child. It's his own home. So he literally opened a program in his own home and brought us into his home and saved our life. And to the kids out there who chose and still choose to benefit from the lessons that they taught and us in that experience, I know we're blessed. And to those who don't, I feel sorry for you guys, and I hope that you know that you're always part of the KW family, and that you always can reach out, and you're always going to have a home with us no matter what. And so I go to my computer is doing a lot of falling asleep right now. So I go to this treatment center, and it's not even, I hate calling it a treatment center, KW Legacy Ranch. It wasn't a treatment center. It's a home. It's my family. It's where I grew up. Really, it's where I grew up. It's where I learned to be a man, how to, quite literally, how to weld, how to take care of animals, how to milk a cow, how to fix pipe, how to do mechanics, how to do carpentry. I mean, we built a cabin from the ground up. Like crazy stuff, crazy stuff. And so I'm forever grateful for that experience, right? But it was tough. Don't get me wrong, it was tough. Going through that experience was I mean, mind you, now at this point, I was gone for a year already when I was 13 years old. And I don't know how I did that, but whatever. I was gone for a year when I was 13 years old, and then now I'm gone for another 2+ years. When I'm 15 until I was 18. Almost 19. Well, 16 I should say. 16 until I was 18, almost 19. So it was over 2 years. So cumulative, it was 3.5, almost 4 years of my youth that I spent in these residential treatment centers. And that's not even including, like I had said, all of the inpatient treatment I did in the beginning, all of the hospitals I was in, all this stuff. So I literally grew up in therapy, in inpatient, outpatient treatment, in residential treatment, in hospitals, in you name it. In the middle of nowhere, Nevada, by Area 51, you name it. I was there. And I am grateful to my parents, my adoptive parents, Arthur and Jillian, for being willing. Because you know how hard it is? It was hard for me being the child away from home. It was just as hard, if not harder, for my parents to have to send me away from home and to know that they weren't going to be able to give me the help that I needed, and to be willing to remove themselves from the situation to get me the help that I needed is a true form of love. It really is. So, that was a lot. That was a lot that I just went through, but I wanted to give everybody a backstory, and not just a backstory, the most vivid, in-depth backstory I've ever given. The most in-depth backstory I've ever given. Now, after I got out of KW Legacy Ranch, I ended up going to this college called Southern Utah University. It's an incredible college. If you're thinking about sending your kid there, or if you're a high school student thinking about going to college, definitely go check out Southern Utah University, because it was an incredible experience for me. I went there, quite frankly, because I just wanted to go anywhere but the residential treatment centers. And my dad wanted me in college, and I was like, all right, sounds good, whatever. So, I went. And it was where my therapist at KW Legacy Ranch had gone to school. It was close to the ranch, so it made sense. So I go to this school, and I'm just doing generals, right? I'm just there for generals, just a regular experience, right? Just the experience of, like I said, I grew up in treatment centers, just trying to have a regular experience, But it was the first time that quite frankly, I was free. I was 18. I had my own rights. Nobody could come take me anymore. Tell me that I had to go be in an institution, this, that, and of course, unless I broke any laws. But, I'm a law-abiding citizen. So, now, before I proceed any further, I want to get into something that's very, very heavy. I've referenced it before, but I've never gone into depth in the amount of detail that I'm going to be going into right now with this situation. So I just want to say, if anybody has any kind of, if sexual trauma is triggering for you guys, this is a good time for you to be warned. Trigger warning. Um, I'm just gonna say it how it is, and I'm not gonna mince any words. Really, when I was a young child, probably between the ages 5 to 10 or so, I, to the best of my recollection, uh, my adoptive sister and I had sexual relations. We had intimate relations with each other. Now, mind you, mind you, this is sexual exploration is actually a part of psychological development and with children, and it's very normal actually between children who it happens between preschool children, usually not kindergarten but preschool usually. Kids will start to, obviously that's the age to start asking, well, what is, they discover their private parts. They just ask mommy and daddy, like, what is this, what is that, like those kind of things. They're very curious, they don't know any better. So I'm a very loving individual, I'm a very caring individual, and so is my sibling. And we, it started innocently, just with us, playing like mommy and daddy did. Well, let's be like mommy and daddy. And we would, we would make these tents, we'd make these forts, and we would play with her Barbie dolls like they were our children and things like that. And then it just progressed into more sexual stuff out of exploration, out of curiosity, and that's where it also, a part of what played into that was, unfortunately, my parents' lack of really being in tune with their children and being very present in their in their children's life. My parents are very high functioning individuals, very highly successful individuals. My dad is a music executive in the industry. My mom is a Pilates teacher and was a professional ballerina. So they're very, very busy. They're very, very efficient. They're very, very professional. But they weren't always very good with intimacy and emotion and connecting and bonding with their children, and let alone being kind of aware of what was going on with their children, being in tuned into their children, right? Being aware of what's going on with them and how they're doing in general when they're, being tuned into their child's emotions and what's going on and stuff. So anyways, this stage of exploration between my sister and I, my sibling and I, occurs. And it naturally stops, as it does with children who, usually it happens with children who are in preschool, like I said. It can happen with children who are older, right? Into kindergarten, sometimes into elementary school. But nonetheless, so it progressed, and it naturally stopped on its own. And we ended up, I never thought anything of it, quite frankly, with you, until I was in one of my treatment centers, and later on, many years later on in life. And well, let me first say this, I want to acknowledge any feelings that my sibling has about how the experience made him feel, how it may be very confusing for him, for her, I'm sorry, her, and for how she feels. I want to acknowledge that at the end of the day, everybody has their own feelings, and everybody goes through their own situations, their own ways. However, I know that my intentions were pure, and my intentions were out of love and out of desire to connect with my sibling, just like I had a desire to connect to mommy and daddy, and just how we had seen our mommy and daddy connect with each other. So later on, my sibling ends up framing me for sexual assault, essentially, is what happens. The reason I use the term framing me as sexual assault for sexual assaults is because it'd be one thing to just say that, right, and then hash it out with me. But it got to the level of accusing me. The police were involved. There was an entire case open. Detectives came and spoke to my parents, him, me, all kinds of stuff. And mind you, I'm 15, 16 years old in a residential treatment center with my, away from home, with my freedoms taken away. And I get told by my therapist that this is what's happening. And I'm in shock. The only thing I can relate it to nowadays is someone like Johnny Depp or Jonathan Majors. And you can look, Johnny Depp is one outcome and Jonathan Majors is another. And it was just a surreal experience to have that coming from my own sibling. Obviously, it was a surreal experience for my own self to have to deal with and try to process the fact that, like, I had explored with my own sibling like that. But I came to learn also through my therapist and through studying psychology that it was it's not obviously normal, but it was not as uncommon as I thought it was. And in fact, I ended up finding out that not a lot, but I had friends who I grew up with who had gone through similar situations. So, but they had not been framed for sexual assault. And unfortunately, this is, in my opinion, it's a manifestation of my sibling's mental illness, and I won't get too much into that. But she is also adopted, and I grew up with her as my sister, and now she is a he and is my brother, and they're transgender, and much more severe mental illness than me. Not to compare or anything like that, but you have to make distinctions when, he has manic depression, he has bipolar disorder, he's borderline schizophrenic, he's in a state of psychosis. It's very different than some anxiety, not some anxiety, but like an anxiety disorder or mild depression like I had, or even seizures, just very different, but not same level of severity. So yeah, sorry, I had to catch my breath there for a second. So my sibling, unfortunately, I've come to the belief now that my sibling's mental illness progressed to the point where he entered a state of psychosis and lost touch with his sense of reality and the physical world, and unfortunately lost, in a Freudian sense, lost his self, and herself is now a he. And look, I will take a stance, and because I've witnessed it personally with watching my sibling, that obviously there are transgender people out there, but right now what's happening is there's an epidemic of children who are sick, who are looking for help, who are looking for a way out, and the transgender cult gives them what they believe is a way out, a false ideology for them to adapt, a cult-like following for them to follow. And I see it as an ideological parasite of the mind. And unfortunately, I've lost my sibling to it, and in the process, he framed me for sexual assault. Now, I was cleared legally by the LAPD, by detectives. First and foremost, I was too young to be charged with any kind of crime, but I guess I should say, really, first and foremost, they determined that there was no evidence of ill intention. There was no evidence of me coming from any kind of place of malice, any kind of harm, anything like that. And the case was closed, and it was moved on from. But the experience of me having to go through that with my own sibling was beyond traumatic. And then in that process, I not to my parents' own fault, but look, it was traumatic for all of us, and my parents reacted in their own way to it, and their way to it was to they felt like if they didn't feed into my sibling's ideology, that my sibling would kill himself, and or they would lose him to the streets. And so they did everything and have done everything they can to feed into that ideology, and it's a lot better nowadays. But at the time, that meant I was exiled from the state of California. I was exiled from my own home. I wasn't allowed to have any. I wasn't allowed to come home, and obviously I haven't talked to my sibling in almost a decade now, and there's this falsehood that my parents don't talk to me, they, and don't support me, but because they have to keep that image for my sibling, or else they're gonna, my sibling's gonna have some mental breakdown or whatever. But because I'm the villain in his narrative here, and like I said, he's lost touch with reality, and it's very sad. But I don't want to get too much into his story because it's his story and it's not my story. But that part of his story has affected my story. So, I am a survivor, I believe, of false accusations, of an attack on my character, attack on my rights. I deserve the right to be presumed innocent until proven guilty, which thankfully I live in America, and the justice system prevailed for me and showed up for me the way it's supposed to. But it really created this bind between my parents and I, because obviously they didn't know how to deal with the news of finding out that happened between their children, but also now it's like if they show that my sibling that they support me, to my sibling it looks like they're supporting his like abuser in his mind and all this. So it's just it was a very complex situation, and so out of survival, my parents developed what I've now learned to be narcissistic qualities, narcissistic traits, behaviors, a personality disorder, if you will, a mild degree of it, I should say. And I want to distinguish, there's a difference between being vainly narcissistic, like actually just being completely vain and into yourself and just nihilistic. And there's a difference between that and then adapting narcissistic behaviors and mentalities as a defense mechanism and survival mechanism because you don't know how to deal with what you're going through. So my parents, unfortunately, that's how they reacted with me, and they shunned me. They quite frankly, excuse me, they quite frankly abandoned me emotionally, psychologically, every way but financially. And it being thrown into the world after growing up in institutions, in mental health treatment centers and hospitals and all that, being thrown into the world and then all on your own, and feeling like you don't have your parents there. I couldn't call my parents for support. I couldn't have an emotional conversation with them. I wasn't getting like an I love you, a hug. None of that. We weren't seeing each other barely even. They barely came to visit me in college. I couldn't go home. I couldn't visit them at home. I wasn't allowed to come to LA. So it was a very traumatic experience for me I've essentially felt deserted, humiliated, dehumanized by my own family, by my own parents, my sibling, and it could have broke me, but it didn't, and I ended up moving to Portland, Oregon, and I lived there for 3 years, and that was a great experience. And while I was in college, before I moved to Portland, Oregon, I was in college in Utah, in Cedar City, like I said, at Southern Utah University. But before I moved to Portland, Oregon, and then so during that time of me going to college and living in Portland, Oregon, is what I'm trying to say. I had what I call now my psychedelic awakening, my psychedelic era, whatever you want to call it. Um, I began to experiment with LSD and psilocybin, magic mushrooms, because I quite frankly, I just wanted answers. I felt I needed help, and nothing had helped me, and nothing had worked. I'd been in treatment centers, I'd been on every medication, I'd been everything, and I had read some stuff on some forums, about how great still psychedelics could be. And so I said, you know what? Why not? I'll try it, and if it doesn't work, I'll never take them again. And long story short, they ended up saving my life, and I ended up having this incredible experience. It was not my first LSD trip or my first psilocybin trip, but after becoming an experienced psychedelic user, a psychonaut, if you will, I I I had I had a spiritual awakening. I had a spiritual awakening. I had an intense ego death. I watched my soul split into two. I went into visual. I mean, I was hallucinating. I went into a totally different reality. Totally different. I was not I was not on Earth. I was not in this dimension. Whatever you want to call it. I was not here. And I watched my soul split into two. It looked like a yin and a yang. And I watched this ball of whatever, I don't know what to call it, but I knew it was my ego. I watched it separate, and I was in the presence of God. I don't know what else to say. I don't know how else to describe it, but I was in the presence of the divine, and I was shown my calling, my true purpose. I was shown all of these ways to heal myself. I was shown the path to recovery. I was shown the light out of my darkness through psychedelics, and I'll go into that in depth in another podcast, and we'll do a whole segment about it, But psychedelics, LSD and psilocybin in specific, saved my life. It's a miracle. I'm so thankful to the universe and to God for being able to saving me, for divine intervention through psychedelics. So long story short, I end up moving because I got to wrap up this podcast because it's getting pretty long. But I end up moving back to Los Angeles just a year ago. I finally came home. I finally reestablished a relationship with my parents. I see them consistently now. I can be in physical contact with them. I'm not being threatened with my survival, to be sent away, to this, to that, to be abandoned or that, whatever. My sibling is not framing me for anything. And I'm finally home. And as I'm sure it was kind of a crazy whirlwind for you to listen to, you can imagine it was a crazy whirlwind of a life for me to live. And I love my parents. I don't want anybody to think that they're these bad people. They're not. And I love my sibling too. He's not this bad person. He is an incredible human being who is unfortunately he's sick. He has a mental illness. He's very sick. And I hope that he heals, and I hope that he receives the divine intervention that I was able to receive in his own way. I pray for him. And I see myself as a survivor of sexual assault, of parental neglect, narcissistic abuse, of physical abuse, emotional abuse, psychological abuse, being an adopted child, a drug baby, seizure, you name it, all these things. And I didn't even go into what I love doing most, which is making music. And this whole time, through all of that, I taught myself how to make music through YouTube. While in treatment centers, I used to write songs in my head. I wasn't allowed to make music there, let alone watch YouTube. But I used to write songs in my head. I used to memorize them, and as I would write them, and I taught myself how to make music. And when I was in college, I used to record in my garage in freezing temperatures, and I grinded. And here we are. We built this platform. We built this community. Shout out to all my fans. Shout out to all the artists and producers that I've connected with in the community. And this is just the beginning. You know, this is just the beginning. And I want people to know that my music is a way for me to be a messenger of the universe, to help people heal through the sharing of my story. It's not just about making good sounds and whatnot, because anybody can do that. But I'm here to really develop, to convey a message, communicate a message to you guys of healing through my own anecdotal experience, through my own testimony. So, with that being said, we're going to wrap this podcast up. There's a lot for me to expand on that I'm going to expand. I'm going to go into more depth on everything that I touched on today in the next podcast this Thursday. And I'm going to touch on everything in even more detail. But I really wanted people to understand that where I'm coming, I wanted people to know that you're not alone. If you're going through something similar, or anything, if you feel like you can relate in any kind of way, you're not alone. Please don't give up on yourself, and keep on keeping on, because great things always come. Great things always come. They really do. They really do. Fight for yourself. Never give up on yourself. Never give up on your dreams. Always pursue yourself and your divine purpose. Okay? I love you guys so much, every single one of you. Remember, change is a choice. Stay strong. Great things always come.